Are you willing to accept those changes, or do those things cause you to get bent out of shape? I brought something as kind of a show and tell this morning. This is my calendar planner. I don't know if any of you guys use one of these, but this is a calendar planner for me, and yours might be a different shape, yours might be a different color, but you might have a calendar planner. And I have what I plan to do for each day of the week. So for this coming week, I'll just let you into my story. For this coming week, I plan to have a staff meeting on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Did you hear that, staff? Okay. And then Tuesday evening, I plan to be at an AA meeting. On Thursday evening, I plan to be at a men's meeting. On Thursday morning, I plan to be at a pastor's prayer time. So I have events for almost every day of the week on here. But let me tell you something. If anyone sitting here had to go to the hospital this week, my plans would go out the window. And my first priority would be to go visit you in the hospital. Do you know that? And I have to lay all of my plans before the Lord and say, this is what I'm thinking might get done this week, but if it doesn't get done, it's okay. And the Apostle Paul basically tells us the same message when he was speaking to the church in Philippi in Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 to 30. And I want to read those verses to you this morning. Now I hope in the Lord to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be encouraged by news about you. For I have no one else like-minded who will genuinely care about your interests. All seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know his proven character, because he has served with me in the gospel like a son with a father. Therefore, I hope to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. I am confident in the Lord that I myself will also come soon. But I consider it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, as well as your messenger and minister to my need, since he has been longing for all of you and was distressed because you heard that he was sick. Indeed, he was so sick that he nearly died. However, God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. For this reason, I am very eager to send him, so that you may rejoice again when you see him, and I may be less anxious. Therefore, welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and hold people like him in honor, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up what was lacking in your ministry to me. May God bless this reading of his holy word. I want you to notice in verse 19, when Paul says, I hope in the Lord. When Paul made plans, he made plans that were surrendered to the Lord's will. And I would like to suggest to you this morning that you and I need to intentionally think about making our plans in submission to the Lord. When I say I want to have a staff meeting this morning, if God changes that plan, that's fine. I still think it's important that we have a staff meeting sometime this week, but if it can't be Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, it doesn't have to be Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. We can change the plan. In other words, are you willing to make your plans and surrender them to the Lord's plans for you? Or are you so rigid that you have to have it exactly the way you want it? In fact, we're planning to have a finance committee meeting immediately after this service. But if I should have a heart attack before the service is over, I hope not to, but if I should, I might not make it to that finance committee meeting. And I think Dale would understand. The point is, we don't have the power to make plans that are unalterable. We don't have that power. And when Paul wanted to talk to the people in Philippi, he wanted to talk to them in person. But guess what? He couldn't talk to them in person. Do you know why? Because he was in prison. So plan number 2 was he wanted to send Timothy to be with them. But he couldn't send Timothy, you know why? Because he was in the kind of prison that was a house arrest. And he needed Timothy to take care of getting his groceries. He needed Timothy to take care of his daily needs while he was in house arrest. So he had wanted to come himself. He couldn't because he was under arrest. He wanted to send Timothy. He couldn't because he needed him with him. So the third option was he was going to send Epaphroditus. And that looks like what was going to actually happen. So let's start with where Paul starts in verse 19. Paul hoped to send Timothy. He said, I hope in the Lord to send Timothy to you soon. Verse 19. Why? Because Paul said that he would be encouraged by hearing news about you. Timothy was a person that Paul had trained in ministry. And if Paul would send Timothy to the church in Philippi, Timothy would know the questions to ask. He would know the people to talk to. He would know how to get into the real nitty-gritty of what's going on in Philippi, and he would be able to come back to Paul and report to Paul what was really happening there. So Paul said, I hope to send Timothy to you because I would be encouraged by hearing news about you. And then he talks about how special Timothy was to him. He said in verse 20, I have no one else like Timothy. Timothy was a one-of-a-kind minister and associate to Paul. He genuinely cares about your interests. That's what a minister of the gospel needs to do. Genuinely care about other people's interests. By the way, if you want to be a caring Christian, that's what you should do. You should genuinely care. Oh, what are they worried about? What are they concerned about? It's not only me all the time. It's what about them? Who are they concerned about? What is their need? So Paul says that's what Timothy is like. He has a genuine care for the interest of your interests. He says everyone else seeks out their own interests and not the interests of Jesus Christ. Isn't that interesting? The people in Paul's day were very similar to the people in our day. We're all out for number one. what I want to do, where I want to go, who I want to talk to. It's all about me. And Paul is not saying that as a compliment. Paul is saying that as a challenge and saying, people, if you're out for your own interests, you're not going to get God's work done. If it's all about me, it's not going to happen, because you need to be like Timothy, and as Timothy was following Christ, you need to care for the interests of others. So he says, I have no one else like Timothy, and then he says, you know that Timothy has proven character. I've watched Timothy. Timothy has proven himself. He has served me in gospel ministry, and he is related to me like a son relates to his father. We have a close connection. And a few weeks ago, just before I left to go to Lincoln, Nebraska, we went to celebrate Pastor Doug Farmer's 85th birthday. And when I read this passage about Timothy and how he worked with Paul, I think about the days when I worked with Pastor Doug Farmer. You know, we were really tight. I could go to his office and he would give me assignments of people he wanted me to go see and things he would want me to do. And I tried my best to do whatever would get the job done, get the ministry done. And Pastor Doug and I were close to each other. I would say we related to each other like father and son. And that's the kind of relationship that Timothy had with Paul. Then he says, I hope to send Timothy to you, but, he says, as soon as I know how things go with me. In other words, as long as I'm in prison here, as long as I can't go out to get my own needs taken care of, I'm depending on Timothy to take care of my needs. So as soon as I would be released, or as soon as I could get out of my situation, then I'll send Timothy to be with you, but I can't do it right now. So Paul had to change his plans. He had to say, not yet. I would like to send Timothy to you, but I need him to stay with me right now. Then in verse 24, Paul said, I intend to come personally. I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come to see you soon. He would be released from his chains. He would be able to visit the church, but he realized that wasn't going to happen right now. There are some times that we realize that things that we hope for, things that we want to accomplish, are not realistic right now. Have you ever faced that? And sometimes we get impatient with ourselves. Maybe you don't, but I get impatient with myself. Can I tell you a very personal example of this? It was about 10 years ago that more than anything else, I wanted to become the pastor of this church. And you know what happened? I was told no. And that was a hard thing for me to handle. But you know what I did? I went home and putted and said, if they won't let me be pastor of this church, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to go on a hunger strike. No, I didn't. You know what I did? I went and started preaching at other churches, and before long, I was invited to go and preach at the Baptist Temple in Modesto. And you know what happened? I preached there for four and a half years, was their pastor, and then I had an opportunity to come back here. And I learned that was God's perfect timing for me. I had to surrender my plans to God. If it had been just my plans, I would have been here 10 years already. But that wasn't God's plan. And I had to surrender my plans to God. And guess what? In a few weeks, on June 15th, I will have been your pastor for 5 years already. That's God's way. That's the whole point of what I get from this passage. Paul had hoped to send Timothy, but it wasn't yet. Paul intended to come personally, but it wasn't yet. And then in verse 25 to 30, Paul was sending Epaphroditus. I consider it necessary to send you Epaphroditus. Why? Well, Paul introduces Epaphroditus as if they didn't know who he was, but he says, he was a special brother. He is my co-worker. He is a fellow soldier in the army of the Lord. And he was special to the church in Philippi. He was sent by the church in Philippi. He had worshiped in the church in Philippi, and he was sent by the church in Philippi with the money to support Paul. And he came to Paul, and something happened. On the way to visit Paul from Philippi with the money in his pocket, Epaphroditus got sick. And I tell you, some of those journeys were not easy. They might have been made, we're not told exactly how he made this journey. It could have been by boat, it could have been several other ways. And while Epaphroditus was on this journey from Philippi to Rome to visit Paul, Epaphroditus gets sick. And he gets terribly sick, so sick that they thought he might die. And he gets to Paul with the money, and Paul and Timothy are surprised to see Epaphroditus so weak, so that they have to minister to Epaphroditus some healing. And maybe Luke was there, I'm not sure, but maybe Luke the doctor helped him get better. There are various other things that happened. And Paul says, this man that you sent as your messenger, Epaphroditus, he was your minister or messenger, and he ministered to my financial need on your behalf. And the church in Philippi was special to him. It says he has been longing for all of you. I don't know if this happens to you, but when I'm not here on a Sunday, do you know what I have happened inside of me? Oh, I wonder if they're starting Sunday school. I wonder if they're starting worship service. I wish I was there. I enjoyed the worship service that I was in Lincoln, but I missed you guys, and as soon as I had extra time, which was on Monday when we were driving, I listened to the whole service. Why? Because I longed to be with my church family. And that's exactly what Epaphroditus was like. And that's what all of us should be like, longing to be part of the church family when they meet. But Epaphroditus found out that the people in Philippi had heard that he got sick on the trip. And he was distressed because he heard that you knew that he was sick. Now just think about this. I have a mom, I saw her last week. She's 87 years old. But I'm very, very careful to tell her about my health. Because if I tell her too much about my health, she will worry. That's what this mom is made up of. My mom worries about her boys. Oh, I hope he's taking enough vitamins. I hope he's taking his pills regularly. I hope he's doing this and that. And if I tell my mom too much about my health, it's not good for her to know because she'll worry. But you know what? That's the relationship that the church had with Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was concerned because the church heard about how sick he got, and he was worried that they would worry too much about his health. He says he was distressed because he heard because you heard that he was sick, and then Paul says he was sick, and it says he nearly died. But God had mercy on him, and God had mercy on me too. In other words, he got better, but he was really sick. It was good they were concerned about him. Why? Because they were going to pray for him. And then in verse 28, he says, I am very eager to send him back to you. Now that Epaphroditus has gone through his sickness, and he's gotten better, it's more important for us to send Epaphroditus back to you than it is for me to send Timothy or for me to come right now. So we're readjusting our priorities, we are readjusting our plans, we're changing our plans to reflect what we believe God is telling us to do right now. I wanted to send Timothy, but I'm not going to. I wanted to come myself, but I'm not going to. Right now, the most important thing is for us to send Epaphroditus back to you because that's what's needed. So when you see him again, that you may rejoice. They wanted the church to rejoice because they saw Epaphroditus again. And when you see him again, I will be less anxious. Phew, he made it back safely. So Paul says in verse 29 and 30, welcome him in the Lord. Welcome him with great joy. Honor people like him. There were people that risked something to get the gospel to you. Think about the person who led you to the Lord. Think about the risk that they took to do what they did. Think about the sacrifices that they made just to share the gospel with you. But they are glad that they did because you responded positively to the gospel. And Paul says, when somebody is willing to sacrifice themselves in ministry, we should honor people like these. Do you remember the person who led you to the Lord? For me, it was my mom. For you, it might have been a teacher or a pastor. If you remember who led you to the Lord, I'm going to guarantee you something. They made a sacrifice in order to do it. I don't know if he remembers this, but my daughter remembers this. Tim Weimer was the person who led my daughter Susanna to the Lord. It was at Awana in Gustine. And Susanna remembers it. And Tim Weimer made sacrifices to keep that Awana program going. But those programs were going effectively as he led them because he was willing to make sacrifices. And you know what we need to do? Honor him for the sacrifices that he was willing to make to have that happen in Gustine those several years ago. But you know what? That's what ministry is. Making sacrifices so other people can know about the gospel. And Paul says we honor people like these who are willing to make those sacrifices. So he says, he came close to death for the work of Christ, and he risked his life to help you minister to me. In other words, sending Epaphroditus back to you is our priority. I wanted to send Timothy. I want to come myself, but it is most important to get Epaphroditus home. So, when Paul wrote in his planner, I think he wrote in pencil with a big eraser. You know why? Because plans change. And even if you write in ink and have to cross it out, that's okay, because plans change. And that's why we need to submit our plans, not put our plans over the Bible, but submit our plans, put the Bible over our plans. And we need to be willing to put the Lord's plans first. That's the point. All of us have important decisions to make about our plans. Sometimes what we desire has to be put on hold. Other things take priority. Let's learn from Paul to make our plans in the Lord. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you. Thank you for the example that Paul set, that he was willing to submit his plans to your greater plan. We're talking about you being sovereign. We're talking about you being Lord. And help us to practically every day this week submit our plans to yours so that your will would be done and your kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven. I don't know what you have as a plan for your life, but I do know that God has a plan for your life. He wants you to love him and to serve him with all of your heart. If you haven't made that plan yet,